So picking up where we left off in section 5.3 and working with our fractions, we're going to wrap it up by just going back and reviewing the different operations and how they work with fractions. So we're going to start with multiplication, right? This one's very straightforward. When you're multiplying fractions, this rule just says multiply what's on the top, numerator, multiply what's on the bottom, denominator, and then make sure you state your answer in simplest form. All right, so we'll start with this one. Right, I've got two fractions and I'm multiplying. So my rule here just says multiply across the top. That would be -2 times -4. Multiply across the bottom. That would be 3 times 9. I'm going to have 8 in my numerator, 27 in my denominator, and that can't be simplified, so that's my final answer. All right, do note if you're dealing with mixed numbers, you need to convert to an improper fraction before you multiply. All right, so that's what I'm going to do in this case. When I see that these are mixed numbers, remember we multiply here, we add here. So 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 would be 15. Denominator stays the same, right? We did this last class. I'm multiplying, and I'm going to do the same thing here, right? So I'm going to change this to an improper fraction. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9, and the denominator will stay the same. And then I can just multiply these two, right? With fractions, we multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom. So I'm going to be looking at 135 on the top, 32 on the bottom. Now, always be careful about how you're asked to enter your answer. If it said leave your answer as an improper fraction, then you would leave it just like this. If it said convert it to a mixed number, then you would go one more step. You would say, how many times does 32 divide into 135? All right, it goes 4 times. 32 times 4 is 128. So there's a remainder of 7, and the denominator would stay the same. Okay, either one of these are correct answers, but depending on how MyLab asks you to enter your answer, it'll mark it wrong if you have it in a different form. All right, now division is directly related to this. All right, with division, what you're going to do is you're going to keep the first fraction the same. You're going to change from division to multiplication, and then you're going to flip the second fraction. Keep, change, flip. All right, so for example, right here, you see this is division. Keep the first fraction like it is. Change from division to multiplication. And just flip the second fraction. And now you're right back to multiplication. So this is going to work just like the others. All right, once you do that keep, change, flip, then you just multiply across the top. 7 times 3 is 21. Multiply across the bottom. 8 times 5 is 40. So division is the same as multiplication. You just have to remember to keep the first fraction as it is, change it to multiplication, and always flip the second fraction. All right, now we get into addition and subtraction. All right, and with addition and subtraction, the key thing to remember, I know you've heard this before, to add or subtract fractions, you must have a common denominator, right? You don't have to have that for multiplication or division, but you do for addition and subtraction. If you do have a common denominator, then it's very simple. You just add what's in the numerator, keep what's in the denominator, And then if you can simplify, both of these are divisible by 4, you do that. And it works the same with subtraction, right? If your denominators are the same, just subtract what's in the numerator, keep the common denominator, and then if you can simplify, these are both divisible by 2. Always state your answer in simplest form. All right. What makes it a little bit more difficult is when you need to work with cases that do not have the same denominator. All right. And so what you have to do when that happens is you have to find the least common denominator, which is also called the least common multiple. Basically, you just look at multiples of each denominator, and the first one they have in common, that's going to be your common denominator. Okay, so like right here, my denominators are not the same. I have a 5 and I have a 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start listing out some multiples. 5 times 1 is 5. 3 times 1 is 3. Right? Not the same. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 2 is 6. Not the same. 5 times 3 is 15. 3 times 3 is 9. Right? Still not there. 5 times 4 is 20. 3 times 4 is 12. Still nothing in common. All right? 5 times 5 is 25. 3 times 5 is 15. And right there I can stop because I have found a common multiple. Now, once you find your common multiple, you have to rewrite each fraction with that common denominator. And the way you rewrite a fraction with a new denominator, whatever is done to the denominator must also be done to the numerator. Okay, so notice my first denominator is going from 5 to 15. So what happened there is it was multiplied by 3. So that same thing has to happen to my numerator. That means the 2 is multiplied by 3 and it becomes a 6. That way you have an equivalent fraction just with a new denominator. And the same thing with the second fraction. All right, that 3 has to become a 15. So it has to be multiplied by 5. That means the exact same thing has to happen to the numerator. So that 1 will be multiplied by 5 as well. And that numerator becomes a 5. And then now what you have is a situation with a common denominator of 15, and you can just add the values across the top. So 2/5 plus 1/3, find the common denominator, is going to give me a value of 11/15. All right, this will take you some practice to get used to. All right, so be prepared for that. You know, try not to get frustrated as you're working through these. All right, so I'm going to work one more of these. We'll do a subtraction. And I'm going to come down, let's see, and work this one where we have 3 values. All right, and the others, like always, you work them and then I'll post your solutions. So this has 3 different fractions, all right, 3 different denominators. So I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to look at each one. I've got 25, I've got 100, and I've got 40. Those are my denominators. All right, so 25, if I start looking at its multiples, right, 25 times 1 is 25, times 2 is 50, times 3 is 75, times 4 is 100, and so on. All right, I can go back to that if I need to, but once I've listed a few, all right, then I'm going to move to the next one. 100, right, 100 times 1 is 100, 100 times 2 is 200, and so on. Now, I have a common multiple with 25 and 100, right? That would be 100. but I need to see if this is going to work for 40. So 40 times 1 is 40. 40 times 2 is 80. 40 times 3 is 120. So 100's not going to do it, all right? But let me just keep going. 40 times 4 is going to be 160. 40 times 5 is going to be 200. All right? So there's a common multiple between 40 and 100. And if I go back up here to 25, right? If 100 is in there, then 200 is going to be in there as well, right? If I just keep looking at multiples of 25, 25 times 8 is 200. So sometimes you'll find them pretty quick. Sometimes it may take a little bit longer to get to that common multiple, all right? But it's got to be common for all three. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite each fraction with that common denominator. All right, so let's start with our first fraction. To go from, 25 to 200, 25 has to be multiplied by 8. So that means I've got to do the same thing to my numerator. And 4 times 8 becomes 32. All right, our second fraction, to go from 100 to 200, this is multiplied by 2. So I've got to do the same thing to my numerator. So that 9 has to be multiplied by 2 as well, and this becomes 18. And then my last fraction, that denominator is 40, right? To go from 40 to 200, this has to be multiplied by 5. That means I got to do the same thing to my numerator. So 7 times 5 tells me this will become 35. Okay, rewrite each fraction. And now that we have a common denominator, all right, these are subtractions, so I'm going to go ahead and write that as adding the opposite, so I can use my rules. Right, I can go ahead and combine common denominator of 200, 32 plus negative 18 plus negative 35. All right, and so then just simplifying my numerator, 32 plus negative 18, those are opposite signs. All right, so I'm going to subtract them. The bigger one, the 32, is positive, so that's 14. And then I've still got my plus negative 35. So again, keep that common denominator. It doesn't go anywhere. 14 plus negative 35. Again, opposite signs. So I'm going to subtract them. That gives me 21. This time the bigger number is negative 35. So that's going to leave me with negative 21. All right, this does not have any common factors or anything like that. It can't be simplified. So I'm going to state my answer as negative 21 over 200. All right, now the remainder of this section is just a lot more examples of working with fractions and also combining that with your order of operations. So I am going to make 1 or 2 additional videos here where I'll look at a couple of examples in this section and then a couple of examples with the application problems. But in the meantime, I want you to go ahead and take these rules and work through as much of the homework as you can in section 5.3 with just basic multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction with 2 fractions.